Okay, welcome in. I'm now going to be previewing the first round of the NHL playoffs. I can't believe that we're already in the postseason mode. I feels like I say this with any league that when the season comes to an end, it's just felt like it was just so short lived. If that makes any sense, it honestly felt like the puck drop just happened yesterday in October, and here we are almost at the end of April, and now half of the league went home, and the other half are competing for what I believe is the greatest trophy in all of sports. So I'll start from left to right. I'll preview the Western Conference side, talk about the teams' histories against each other, and then I'll make my predictions for the upcoming series. So the Dallas Stars not only got first place in the Central Division for the first time since 2016, but they actually got first place throughout the playoffs in the Western Conference. So if they have to make it all the way to the West Final, every other team would have to go through them in order to get to the Stanley Cup final. There, talk about a task, overwhelming task that you finish with the best record in the Western Conference, but now you have to take on the defending Stanley Cup champions. Unreal. Normally, you think you take on a number two seed, or sorry, a wild card number two seed or a wild card number one seed. The other team should be very heavily favored, and I'm not saying that Dallas shouldn't be. They are a very excellent team. I mean, they have Jason Robertson, they got Tyler Seguin, you got Joe Pavelski, Jamie Benn. They have a lot of guys on that team that can help them. I mean, for God's sakes, these two teams, I will talk about their history in just a second. These two teams just met last year in the playoffs in the West Final. So it's not like it's a fluke that both of these teams are where they're at. They both are very good, respectively. So I will talk about their two previous encounters in the postseason. The first one happened in 2020 when they met in the bubble in the West Final. Dallas would prevail, winning that series 4-1 en route to the Stanley Cup Final. And then just last year, the two teams met again in the West Final, respectively. This time, Vegas got the better of Dallas, winning that series in 6 games. So this is the rubber match here. Whoever wins this one will have the 2-1 series lead when it comes to the postseason. And I really, really want to say the Stars are going to win this. Like I'll put it this way: the Stars need to finish Vegas off early. Like they got to win this series in like 5 games. I know this sounds crazy, but if you push Vegas to 6 games or 7 games, that could be very dangerous for the Dallas Stars because the Vegas Golden Knights are slowly starting to get healthy. Now, there's no guarantee that Stone will be back for game one, but he could be back for game two or three or sometime in this series. And if Vegas happens to split the first 2 games in Dallas, going back home, this could be a very dangerous thing for the Stars. If there's any team that could possibly pull off an upset, I could easily see the Vegas Golden Knights. So I'm on the fence with this one. I think Dallas can win this series, but if they do, they got to put it away in like 5 games. If Vegas wins, it'll be like a 6 or 7 game series. So this is one where I'm kind of on the fence with this one. I want to go with Vegas. My heart says Vegas, so I'm going to stick with that. They again now Dallas could easily steamroll over the Vegas Golden Knights, considering they did struggle getting into this playoff spot. But again, if all the chips line up in a row, and Vegas and they get all their players back, and they can get into the playoff format from last year, and they get Aiden Hill or Logan Thompson playing out of their mind, they could easily pull off a first round upset. So that's why I'm going to go with the defending Stanley Cup champions. The next matchup has the Winnipeg Jets taking on the Colorado Avalanche, the number 2 and 3 seed, respectively. Now, it's a shame that one of these two teams will be bounced in the first round. This is going to be one of those series where I don't think it's going to be a short series. I don't think I'll just say this right now. I don't think any series is going to be a sweep or 5 games. These teams all fought hard. They fought tooth and nail to get to where they're at. That there's no way that they're going to just let the whole series just go away and not put up a fight. I'm going to be a little bold on this one, and I say if Hellebuck can stand on his head, which he has done all season, and if he hasn't won the Vezina, I believe he should win the Vezina for the best goaltender in the league. I could see him easily stealing a series over the Colorado Avalanche. Now, I don't think that it's going to be a runaway, like I just said. I don't think the Jets are going to pull this off in a sweep or 5 games. This could easily go 6 or 7 games, respectively. My only question for the Avalanche is Georgiev. Can he live up to the expectations that they expected him to be when they signed him in the 2022 offseason. Last year, they won the division, but they ultimately lost in the first round to the Seattle Kraken. So there's a lot of what ifs. Can we get the goalie that helped us win a division a season ago, and can he be consistent? If not, I can easily see the Jets taking this series. But again, I don't think it's going to be a sweep or 5 games. This will be a 6 or 7 game series, in my opinion. So I believe that the Jets should advance to the West semifinals. Alrighty, the Vancouver Canucks won the Pacific Division for the first time in 9 years since 2015. And the last time they were in the playoffs was in the 2020 bubble when they beat the Minnesota Wild in the first play-in round. They upset the defending Stanley Cup champions at the time, the St. Louis Blues, and then they went the distance with the Vegas Golden Knights in the West semifinals, ultimately falling in Game 7. And they haven't had any playoff appearances since. So I'm sure that the fans will be excited to actually be in the arena to watch their team play. So they will be taking on the Nashville Predators. Now, despite the fact that Nashville finished in a wild card position, they did not have a bad season at all. I believe they won like 18 games where they had at least a point. I think they won like 16-0-2 or something like that. It was a crazy run. And I do remember at the start of the season, they struggled to get out of the gates. There was no ands, ifs, or buts about it. There were a lot of question marks around this team, but they finally were able to gel, and they're back in the playoffs for the first time in 2 years. The only time these two teams met in the postseason was back in 2011. The Vancouver Canucks took care of business against the Predators then and there in 6 games en route to their first Stanley Cup appearance since like 94 or whatever it was. So it was a hell of a run for the Canucks that season. I'll never forget that. But I'm not here to talk about the past. We're here to talk about the present. I think this is going to be a 6 or 7 game series, just like I discussed with the previous one. And I will give the edge to the Canucks in this matchup. I just believe they are a better overall team. And no disrespect to Saros, but if Demko can play like he did back in the 2020 bubble, he could easily easily take down the Predators in this matchup. Now, the Predators are no slouches. They have a lot of forwards that can be very dangerous between Novak, Forsberg, O'Reilly. They got a lot of weapons. And we have Roman Josi on the back end as well. It'll be a very intriguing matchup. This is, I believe, the only matchup where they have 2 defensive captains in Quinn Hughes for the Canucks and Roman Josi for the Predators. So I do believe the Canucks should advance to the West semifinals. Okay, the next matchup, and here we go again. The Edmonton Oilers and the Los Angeles Kings finishing 2nd and 3rd respectively. They have a long playoff history, so let's just dive right into that before I make my little preview for this series. So these two teams have met 9 times in the playoffs. This will be the 10th time. The first time happened back in 1982. They met in the Smythe Division semifinals. The Kings won that series 3-2. It was a best of 5 at that time. In 1985, Edmonton would get their revenge, meeting again in the Smythe Division semifinals, sweeping the Kings 3-0. In 1987, they met again in the division semifinals. This time the Oilers would win that series 4-1. In 1989, now this was a very intriguing matchup because that's when the infamous trade happened that previous offseason when Gretzky got dealt from Edmonton to LA. So playing against his former team, I'm sure he had a little bit of hostility with him. And the Los Angeles Kings would knock off, at the time, the defending Stanley Cup champions Oilers in 7 games, winning that series 4-3. They met again the following season. This time, Edmonton made very short work of the Kings, knocking them out in 4 straight games, en route to what ended up being their last Stanley Cup. The following postseason in 1991, they met again in the Smythe Division Finals. The Oilers would win that series 4-2. And in 92, they met again in the division finals. Once again, the Oilers got the better of the Kings, winning that series 4-2. Now it would take 3 decades for these teams to finally get reunited in the postseason. So in 2022, they met in the West quarterfinals. The series would go the distance, but the Oilers would prevail, winning that winning that series, 4-3. And just last season, again, the West quarterfinals. This time it went 6 games, and the Oilers still won 4 games to 2. So they have a 7-2 series lead. So even if the Kings were to happen to win this series, they would still be trailing the all-time series 7 games to 3. But if the Oilers happen to win, obviously it would be 8-2 in favor of them. Now for this 2024 season, you could say on one side, history has a habit of repeating itself, and it clearly does, because this is the third time in 3 years that these two teams will be duking it out to advance to the West semifinals. My only question is, I'd say maybe goaltending and offense when it comes to the Kings. And for the Oilers, can they really rely on Skinner to carry this team all the way through the playoffs? Obviously, last year they went to the semifinals and lost, but as it's been made very clear for the Oilers, it's cup or bust. So they're not just here for the playoffs and then to get bounced in the first or second round. They are determined to go all the way to the Stanley Cup final. And as for the Kings, they are a very good team. They just have bad luck when it comes to postseason standings. Now, I know it did come all the way down to the last game. Had the Kings lost to the Blackhawks and then had Vegas Golden Knights won, these two teams would have flipped. LA would have been in the number 2 wildcard spot, while the Golden Knights would have finished third in the Pacific Division. So those teams are really neck and neck in the standings. But the Kings ultimately came away with a last game victory to secure a third spot in that Pacific Division. I'm going to say the Oilers, again, I would be very shocked to see them get bounced in the first round. If they did, then there'd be a very long off season, especially with contracts like Draisaitl coming up. I think that's next year, and McDavid the year after. So this is pretty much like win now mode if you're the Oilers. And as for the Kings, like I said, they are a very good team. There's a reason that they finished in the top 3 respectively. But when you have to go up against McDavid, when that guy gets into like beast mode, there's like no stopping him. You could have 4 guys by your blue line, and he'd still find a way to dance around them and still make the goalie and still undress the goalie for a fantastic finish. I mean, how many highlights have you seen of him? He's literally a highlight reel on skates. Okay, so off to the east side where we have the New York Rangers. They won the President's Trophy as the best team in the NHL. So like the Stars, they will have home ice advantage if they can make it all the way to the finals. And once they do get to the finals, if they do, again, they would still have home ice advantage throughout. Now, with that being said, the President's Trophy winners tend to have a tendency to choke in the playoffs, aka last year the Boston Bruins lost in 7 games. In 2022, the Panthers lost in the second round. And in 2021, I think the Avalanche did, but that's when they had the whole realignment. But again, the Avalanche fell in the second round. In 2020, I think Boston was on the verge of getting the President's Trophy, but then when the whole season got shut down and the whole reformat happened in the summertime, it didn't really matter at that point. And I'm trying to think in 2019 who won that. But again, all 4 teams, or all the top teams in 2019, were ousted in the first round. So just because you get the President's Trophy doesn't guarantee that you can have an easy road into the Stanley Cup Finals. They are matched up with an opponent they are very familiar with. This is going to be their 10th time in their history that these two teams have met in the playoffs. The Washington Capitals, they just snuck in, kind of like how I don't know where I was going with that, but yeah, it took the Capitals until game 82 to finally secure a playoff spot. So, as I said, this is going to be the 10th time these two teams have met in the playoffs, and I'll take a quick little history at their previous series and who has the edge overall. So in 1986, their first matchup, they met in the Patrick Division's final. The Rangers would prevail in that series 4 games to 2. In 1990, Washington would get their revenge, knocking out the Rangers in 5 games, again in a Patrick Division final. In 1991, these two teams met in the Patrick Division semifinals, so basically like the first round of the playoffs. The Washington would win that series 4 games to 2. In 1994, they would meet in the East semifinals. The Rangers would win that contest 4-1 en route to their first Stanley Cup in, I think, like 50 years or something like that. It was crazy. It would take 15 years for them to get reacquainted in the postseason in 2009. Washington would win that series in 7 games. 2 years later, again in the East quarterfinals, Washington would prevail, winning that series in 5. In 2012, they'd meet in the East semifinals. The Rangers took down the Capitals in 7 games. In 2013, they would meet in the East quarterfinals, Rangers winning that series 4 games to 3. And the last time these two teams met was in 2015. And again, the Rangers took down the Capitals in 7 games. So the Rangers have a 5-4 series lead when it comes to an all-time playoffs against the Washington Capitals. I truly believe that the Rangers will win this series. And like I've said, I'm going to sound like a broken record. I don't think it'll be easy. I mean, unless the Capitals just don't show up at all, I could see the Capitals putting up a bit of a fight. And the thing with division rivals is that it doesn't matter if you're the number 1 seed or you're the number 8 seed. If you are familiar with this team, you play these guys maybe 3 or 4 times a year. There's a strong hatred towards each other. And it doesn't matter how dominant you were in the regular season. It doesn't matter how poorly you played in the regular season. The playoffs are a completely different aspect to the hockey to hockey. So it doesn't matter if the Rangers swept the series with the Capitals. The Capitals could easily come into New York and pull off an upset. Not saying that they will. Again, I am picking the Rangers in this series, but I don't think they'll win this series in 4 games or 5 games. Again, I think a lot of these series should go 6 games or the distance with 7. Okay, the next matchup has the Carolina Hurricanes taking on the New York Islanders, the second and third seed, respectively. This is going to be the third time these teams have met in the playoffs. The first time was in 2019. They met in the East semifinals. The Hurricanes swept the Islanders 4 games to 0. And just last year, they met in the East quarterfinals, and the Hurricanes won that series 4 games to 2. So they have a 2-0 advantage when it comes to the playoff series. So even if the Islanders happen to pull off a win over the Hurricanes, they'd still trail the overall series 2 games to 1. But I got a funny feeling that the Hurricanes, because they are stacked, like they brought in the guys like Kuznetsov and Jake Gensel. These guys are legit cup contenders. If the Rangers weren't in that division, the Hurricanes easily could have finished first in that division. But yeah, I can easily see the Hurricanes winning this series yet again. And again, it could go 6 or 7 games. The Islanders are no slouches. Like they crawled, like it took everything, because I remember at one point they were so far out of the standings, and then they just started improving and started getting better. So it's no fluke that they're in the playoffs. But when you're going up against a juggernaut like the Hurricanes, it's going to be a very tall task, to say the least. Alrighty, the last 2 series will be heading over to the Atlantic Division, where the Florida Panthers would win that division. It came down to the last game. It looked like the Bruins were going to take that division away, or run away with that division, because it seemed like they were in first place for like 80-90% of that season. But again, it took until the very last game for the Florida Panthers to defeat. I can't remember who they played, but they would win their last game. I think it was maybe against the Maple Leafs, and then, or no, hold on a second. I actually have it written down. No, it was against the Maple Leafs. Yeah. So they won, and then the Bruins lost, which is why Boston finished number 2 in the standings. Yeah. Okay, that's what it was. Yeah. So they defeated the Maple Leafs, and then the Bruins lost. So yeah, Florida got the division, the second time in 3 years that they have won the Atlantic Division, and the third time that they've won the Atlantic Division. The first time was back in 2016. They're going up against the Tampa Bay Lightning. And just because the Lightning finished in a wild card spot, do not take them lightly. Yes, they got bounced in the first round last year, and yes, they got off to a poor start this year, but that's only because Vasilevsky was hurt and he didn't play for the first quarter of the season. But the fact that he was able to come back and they were able to still make the playoffs just goes to show how stacked this team really is. And for the team that won the Cup back in 2021, they still have a good chunk of players from that team, like the Stamkoses, like the Kucherovs, like the Cirellis, like the Braden Points. You got your Sergachevs, you got your Hedmans. They got a lot of players from their Cup winning days just 3 and 4 years ago, respectively. And obviously, they made it to the Cup final back in 2022. Again, a lot of those guys were on that team. So they have a lot of experience when it comes to the playoffs. So just because the Panthers won that division and they have home ice advantage, they can't take this Lightning team for granted. And I will talk about this. This is going to be the third time these two teams have met in the postseason. It's all come in the 21st century. The first one was in 2021 when they had the whole realignment. The Lightning would win that series 4-2, and then the following season in 2022 in the East semifinals, the Lightning would sweep the Panthers again en route to the Stanley Cup final appearance. If I had to predict a winner for this series, I could see the Panthers winning it only because they're a more mature team. They are a better team than they were. Even though it's hard to say they're a better team now because we don't know how far they're going to go in the playoffs, considering they made it all the way to the Stanley Cup Finals just a season ago. But they are a very good team, a very well coached team when you have Paul Maurice behind the bench. And as long as Sergei Bobrovsky can play lights out, I could easily see the Panthers taking this series. But it's going to be a dogfight. Like, it's going to be fighting tooth and nail just to get a win over this Tampa Bay Lightning team because Vasilevsky is no slouch. All right, the last matchup, probably the most intriguing matchup of all, has an original six contest as the Boston Bruins are taking on the Toronto Maple Leafs. Now, as I mentioned before, the Bruins did have first place. They lost to Ottawa in their last game, dropping them down to second place in the Atlantic. Toronto was pretty much in third place for like the last half of the season. So I always felt that they were guaranteed to finish in the top three. It was just a matter of whether they're traveling to Florida or traveling to Massachusetts. So this is going to be the 17th matchup in playoff history between these two teams. And I'll go through the list. It dates all the way back to 1933. These two teams met in the semifinals. Toronto would win that series 3-2. I believe back then and up until like the 70s and maybe early 80s, it was a lot of best of 5 series. So a lot of them are going to be like 3-1, 3-2 kind of thing. In 1935, they met again in the in the semifinals. Toronto would win that series 3-1. Now in 1936, this one really intrigues me. They only played 2 games. Each team won a game, but because Toronto had more goals, they ultimately won the series. I'm a little confused about that one because you think you would have thrown in a third game, but clearly something must have happened. But either way, Toronto would win the first 3 matchups, and in 1938 they would win their 4th matchup, sweeping the Bruins, and again in the semifinal matchup, 3-0. 3 years later, in 1941, the Bruins would finally get their revenge, winning that series 4-3. And now and it's kind of funny, I just said that they had a best of 5, and now this is a best of 7. So I'm a little confused about when the whole realignment thing happened, or maybe it happened. I have no idea. Either way, the Bruins would win that series in 7 games. In 1948, Toronto would play them again in the semifinals. This time, the Leafs would win that series 4-1. In the following season, 1949, again a repeat of last year, Toronto would win that series 4-1. 2 years later, once again in the semifinals, the Toronto Maple Leafs would win that series 4-1, but they also had a tie in there as well. So it was like 4-1-1. In 1959, the series would go the distance, and the Leafs again would prevail, win that series 4-3. Now, the reason that I want to just stop here for a quick second is because this is the last time Toronto would beat Boston in the NHL playoffs. Every other series after this would go in favor of the Bruins. So in 1969, the Bruins would sweep the Toronto Maple Leafs 4-0. In 1972, they met again in the quarterfinals. Sorry, I should have said 1972, Boston won the series 4-1. In 1974, the Bruins would sweep the Maple Leafs 4-0. And then, let's see, almost 40 years after that, in 2013, they would be reunited. And again, the Bruins would take down the Leafs in 7 games. 2018 and 2019, again, first round matchups. The Bruins would win both of those series 4-3, respectively. So a lot of game 7s in these teams' histories. Now, it's hard to believe that the overall series is tied at 8. So whoever comes out of this will have a 9-8 advantage when it comes to the series, the playoff series with these two teams. Now, this one's tough because being a Habs fan, I'm not cheering for either one of these teams. So I don't have a dog in who I think will win or should win this contest. If anything, maybe they just both get eliminated and then have an easier path for the Panthers and Lightning to go to the East Final. But unfortunately, that's not how the NHL works. One of these teams has to win, and one of these teams has to lose. And I'll just say it right now: 1959 was a long time ago. 1967 was obviously a little bit sooner, but still also a very long time for the Leafs. The last time they won the Cup. I say the drought continues. I truly believe that the Bruins will win this contest, and it could very well be another Game 7 in Boston. I could easily see this series going 7 games. I'm going to sound like a broken record because I say the same thing with almost every matchup. I don't think one series is going to be over in 5 games. And now, with that being said, it can happen, and who knows? Maybe a lot of series end up being 5 games or 4 game sweeps. But I just think with all the teams that are in the playoffs, they're stacked. They have good qualities, whether it's goaltending, defense, or offense. So every team here has something good going for them. I mean, there's a reason that they're in here and they're not the other 16 teams playing golf, respectively. So yes, I do truly believe that the Boston Bruins will prevail and make the trip to the East semifinals, especially after they got bounced in the first round last year against the Florida Panthers. Okay, well, that takes care of my preview for the 2024 Stanley Cup playoffs. What I plan on doing is still reviewing games as they happen. So after game 1 happens with all the teams, and 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, if it goes the distance, I still will be reviewing games just like a regular season matchup like I have in the past. But obviously, these games mean a little bit more now than they did in the regular season. So, as always, if you're new to this channel and you like this type of content, please feel free to hit the sub button. I'd be very grateful and very appreciative. And until next time, take care.